Um, in terms of our talk, I suppose heritage to a certain extent is more implicit rather than explicit. And I'm going to be talking about craft principally, but Rachel here, a colleague from Soho House Museum in Birmingham, who we worked with, is going to deal with more the heritage side of things. But I suppose in terms of heritage, what we're really thinking about is the issues that have been talked about today, about living heritage, about a kind of creative. We're very interested in museums as kind of creative, imaginative spaces, and in terms of what can go on in them. So the project was one of the Connected Communities co-production projects, and it's called Co-Creating Care, Community Asset Building Research and Enterprise. And I'm just going to say a little bit about the project more broadly, and then Rachel's going to introduce her thoughts about Soho House, and we'll talk about Soho House more generally before talking about the project. So CARE works with amateur craft groups. We saw them as an important area of community assets that are often devalued or dismissed. It employs co-creation process to find out more about what happens when people make things together. And this idea of making things together was an absolutely sort of central aspect of the project in terms of skill sharing, but not just skill sharing, but actually working in collaboratively in groups together, and how craft can actually help us collaborate in particular in distinctive ways. So through acts of collective, what we came to call them acts of collective consciousness raising, crafting consciousness together in groups. So CARE aims to foreground how we learn about ourselves and others by collaborating through crafting. It proposes that this collective knowledge might be developed and applied through, for instance, teaching, creating exhibitions and volunteering, training, community activism in small businesses or through social enterprises. That's linked to our project website, where there's lots of information, including lots of films that we made, including blogs, including examples of the work that was made. The project lasted altogether for about a year and a half. So there's a lot of information Rachel, would you like to say something a little bit about Soho House?
Okay, well, Soho House is in Birmingham, and it's one of the sites that are under the umbrella of Birmingham Museums Trust, and so we are now termed a heritage site. I think this gentleman earlier was sort of talking about how do you define a museum, you know, and then we've talked about what is heritage. Now, when I came to work at Birmingham Museums, Soho House and other smaller sites were called community museums because they're smaller sites within the community. But there was a political decision that was taken a couple of years ago that community museums would not sort of appeal to a National Trust visitor. And so Soho House sits in Handsworth, and so we want to encourage people to come and visit Soho House, which has got an internationally significant role in terms of the founding fathers of the Industrial Revolution met there, and it was one of the early factories was just down the hill. It was a home of Matthew Boulton. So we have this very important historic house within a very deprived area. So there was a decision taken to sort of stop calling them community museums, and now they are heritage sites. So for us, working at Soho House, what we wanted to do was we wanted to use the heritage site in a different way. So what's actually on the site at the moment, there is the home, and it's displayed as it was when Matthew Boulton was living there in the late 18th century. Lots of original pieces of furniture. So it's quite a traditional historic house museum. And we've also got the visitor centre, and then we've got a display of Matthew Boulton's, the things that Matthew Boulton made. But we want to actually not just say, well, it's a museum. We want people who are interested in museums to come and visit us. we want to try and use this heritage site in innovative ways, and so part of that is saying yes to projects like this and trying to get the local community of Handsworth to use Soho House in a different way and not think to themselves, I'm only going to come to Soho House if I'm interested in visiting a museum. They will sort of think, this is a space that I have ownership of and I want to sort of go and visit and just spend time in the tea room. I might want to go and sit in the garden. So that's why we're really keen to get involved in this project.
One of our key partners was Craftspace, directed by Deirdre Figueredo in Birmingham. And Deirdre she's worked with you on different projects, hasn't she, in the past? So there was a long-standing relationship there. Just very quickly, I'm not going to read all of these, but just to pull out, these are just a few of our underpinning ideas. And this idea of untidy creativity and cooperation as a skill were central themes that we started to work with as we worked our way through the project. The untidy creativity comes from Alison Gilchrist's work, where she works with complexity theory as a model for thinking about how communities evolve and engage and expand and community networks, etc. And she looks very carefully at diverse and dynamic connections that operate within community groups. And she promotes this idea of an edge of chaos theory, where the notion of an intermediate zone, where more rigid approaches, as traditional kind of established approaches to, for instance, we started about thinking about that in terms of making, and more random acts happen. And we started to see this idea started to work its way through the project in terms of the different types of craft groups that we're working with, some of whom were very traditional groups and had very fixed ideas about making and skill and what this is, and others were much more open to change and chance and flexibility and things like that. Gilchrist is also useful because she reminds us that how community groups can function as collective resources that can be both inclusive and exclusive. And we did find that when working with craft groups, you think, oh, it's going to be all lovely and everything, but actually there's a lot of dissension. There was a lot of people getting upset with each other. There was a lot of aggression, actually, in different ways. And the tensions in people's sense of what craft is about, what crafted skills are, what the value of craft is, the tensions run high, I can tell you. But at the same time, we were very interested in the notion of making, collaborative making, as something that those tensions could be resolved through the actual process of making. Richard Sennett, sociologist Richard Sennett, talks about this, particularly in his most recent book, Together, I think it's called. And he talks about cooperation, this sort of instinctive cooperation that happens. He used the example of an orchestra of musicians working together and how they instinctively will respond to each other and collaborate. And we were interested in thinking about how that works in relation to craft groups, how people make together, and how people from perhaps very different backgrounds, very different, all kinds of cultural, educational age, backgrounds can come together and actually will resolve the tensions, how they appear, and then how they might be resolved through the making process. And then so these ideas of dialogic and dialectic cooperation again were things coming together through finding common ground, for instance, or through difference, exchanges of difference. Again, were sort of tools that we worked with. So Sennett argues that the key to this is responding to others on their own terms. And again, I think that's something that we found, that the making process was something that people could work their way through. They could, people have done research about there is evidence already existing that when people are working together, when they're making, they will talk together in different ways than if they're not making, for instance. So, eyes down, hands working. You communicate instinctively in ways that are different if you're just all sitting together looking at each other. Right, so these are So we started, the different groups that we're working with, which are in Falmouth, in Dublin and in Birmingham, started developing their own techniques and strategies about thinking about how we skill share, how we can make things together. And these are just a couple of examples of the Falmouth one, when Shane Waltner worked with the artist Shane Waltner and his project Making by Instruction, where people will, there's no instructions, someone will show someone else how to make something, and then that other person will write it down, and then those instructions will be given to somebody else. So what we found is that this is finger knitting, and we found that something that was done kind of individually, these girls down here actually started doing it together, so it sort of generically grew into something that was very creative and very different to what the instructions started with. And this is the Sewing Story Circle. Irene Griffin at Falmouth did this, where everyone sits around in a circle, and people pick a particular stitch and a particular colour of thread, and everyone sews their stitch and tells stories, and then the tablecloths move around at certain points. So it's a collaborative pieces evolve, where people can see their own stitching because of the colour and the type of stitch, but it's a collaborative piece. We did that at Cardiff, at the Cardiff Festival. Lots of school kids there really got into it and really got excited about it. So this is the Dublin group. So this is part of the project that Deirdre ran with the groups in Dublin, at Dublin Castle and at Soho House in Birmingham. So the idea was that the two groups were responding, making creatively and responding to their environments. And this is the Soho House group. We also developed ways in which these groups could communicate with each other through Skype, and also through these lovely tablecloths. There's actually two of them. This is one of them here, where they record, the various groups recorded their reflections and thoughts about the making, the collaboration, etc., creatively in text and image, and then the tablecloths were swapped. Rachel, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I was going to sort of talk a little bit about why we were fortunate enough to work with Craftspace on this, and why we were chosen as a venue. I think it's quite interesting because Matthew Bolton was, sort of one of the people who were really driving forward this idea of mass production. So it's gone from he took these skills, the metalworking skills of these cottage industries within Birmingham. He brought them all together and started with mass production, and then it's sort of coming full circle almost. So people are taking these sort of motifs. Here's some of his candlesticks, and taking design motifs within his work, or within wallpaper, or anything that they were inspired by within the house, and just then sort of creating bespoke pieces for us. Now, Deirdre approached us because we had worked with her before on a Making Moves project, which was a collaborative project. And for us, I think for me, I've sort of come from working at other museums where I've actually sort of driven forward projects on my own. And so we're sort of so stretched within the museums that I don't have time to actually create these projects. However, I still want to sort of see them going on within the museum. And so we've had a few opportunities where partners have approached us, like Deirdre, and said, could we possibly do something? And it's been really fresh. So rather than me sort of controlling things have happened, unexpected things, and it's actually been it's been a lesson for me to actually sort of reach out more to partners, and rather than sort of seeing the negative of there's less time, there's less money to do things, actually really innovative things can happen if you sort of hand control over to other partners like Craftspace. So in terms of what Soho has been doing before that, we've worked for a long time. We're in the 19th year of working with the Asian Women's Textile Group, who meet at Soho House on a weekly basis. And so they use the space, they use the visitor centre, but they don't really sort of connect particularly with the house. And so the Making Moves project that I mentioned, that where we first worked with Craft Space and Deirdre, she worked with us, and we worked with an artist, and the Asian Women's Textile Group actually engaged with the house again, with the heritage and with the designs within the house. So off the back of that, that sort of opened the doors so that Deirdre was able to sort of approach me again and say, there's this other project that we're working on, and would it be possible for us to, come and work with you again? And the Asian Women's Textile Group did actually sort of come and take part in this project as well.
And these are just some close-ups of the tablecloth, but we'll do it quickly. So Skypes, yeah, right. And also members of the groups, a couple of members of the groups in Dublin and in Birmingham came down to Falmouth to work with our Maker Now Fab Lab and actually develop their designs into prototypes. So the idea that these could be not mass-produced, but batch-produced at least. And this idea of the bespoke souvenir developed from that. And here you see all the digital routing, etc. going on there. And this is the group together, some members from Birmingham, some from, all looking very happy. And we've got a very short period of time, but I'll just say a couple of words about each of these, the last three slides, next three slides. But actually, I'm going to go. These are just slides of the people working together. I haven't got time to talk about it in detail. But we developed this idea of a doily archive where people recorded their thoughts and feelings and reflections they developed as the projects developed. These are pieces by Robin. And these three people, Robin, Alex and Viv, who I'll show you slides of next, they became central to driving the project and developing their own group, and were really, really excited by this the processes of what the routing could do, what they could do working in the Fab Lab, and how their ideas would. They all went down with thinking they were going to do one thing and ended up doing something completely different. And Robin thought she was going to do textile work, ended up making these very beautiful pieces of jewellery. This is Alex, who has serious health issues at the time. And was quite withdrawn when the project started, and increasingly through the project he came out of his shell. He became a real driving force, came down to the Fab Lab in Falmouth, and he'd set himself these really complex design problems, design issues really, as a way of, he said himself, as a way of distracting himself and becoming absorbed in the flow of the making and the thinking. And there were stronger health benefits for him now. And this is Viv, who, these are the pieces she made, and examples of the bespoke souvenirs, which are now on sale in the shop, various pieces by these participants are. This is examples, this is our doily archive. It's just to give you an idea. All the groups did this, and we made short films about them talking about this as well. It's just to give you an idea of the kind of visual as well as the written of these beautiful, these different approaches. And this one in the centre here is lovely. And then in the film, she sort of talks about, she uses movement. So just another way of thinking about how we record, how we raise consciousness and think and reflect. Okay, so this is our last slide. So these are just some of the key themes that evolved through the projects, particularly in relation to living heritage, reimagining space, the creativity that can happen in these kind of community museums. And I think we just wanted to, Rachel, you're going to just say something about
I was
that.
just going to sort of finish off by saying, in terms of like the legacy, although the project itself is finished, the group actually asked if they could continue to meet at the museum on a weekly basis. So they are the Soho House Craftivists, and they meet every Wednesday, and we have pieces that they make are for sale in our shop. So we sort of have continued that relationship on an informal basis. So that's really great for us. They've become part of the Soho family.
But the problem is we're all under threat though, so we're all ready
Yes.
to continue and go on, but where's the legacy? Because with Soho House?
Yes, well, there's cuts coming from Birmingham City Council, who is our main funder, so a decision will be made by that in February, and so we're sort of threatened with 50% cut in staff, sort of potential closing of sites, and yeah, so that's making any legacy more difficult. And
There's a petition.
yes.
And there's also a petition at Falmouth as well, because of course they're closing, some of you might know, they're closing our craft course. There's Save Our Crafts is the petition, please sign it. We've got 7,000 signatures already. This is driven by students, of course. But Falmouth are determined to close the crafts course, which includes the Fab Lab and all the work that we've done basically is being just thrown away with it. So, you know, so we don't know what the future's going to be, it's in jeopardy. But, you know, the enormous positive things came out of this project and this collaboration, and we'll find ways of going forward.